was in European trim last year, so they've adopted those rules, modernized a little bit. The LMP3-2 that you talked about is last year's model car, 3 of them running, and you won't be able to tell the difference by just the cosmetics. Really, the biggest difference is the 5.6-liter power plant in the back of the LMP3-1 machine, the new one, and then new aerodynamics, which give these cars a lot more downforce. That 5.6-liter engine gives them about another 40 horsepower. Speed limited to 180 miles an hour, and don't be surprised to see them get to that speed just before the braking zone of turn 1. These are very, very powerful, fast, and sophisticated race cars.
You see the powerful 2021 Lexus IS350F Sport leading this field on its reconnaissance laps before they go green here. And you mentioned the speed of these race cars, Brian. The names on the left, the starting grid for the IMSA Prototype Challenge Series here at Daytona, ones that the average casual fan may not recognize. What type of driver do we find in this series, Brian?
Well, you find all kinds. Maurice Krantz, who's there on the pole in the Mueller Motorsports number 21, shares that car with Lawrence Hare. And these are 2 European drivers, and bronze and silver rated drivers only allowed in the Prototype Challenge category. Krantz, one of the best bronze drivers in the world, and he showed it by qualifying on the pole. It's his debut in this class at this racetrack in IMSA competition. But outside him, Keith Grant, he shares that car with his brother David, showing that he too can throw some world-class lap times down, and it's a pretty stout front row. 2 different manufacturers you'll also see today, Ligier, the Ligier chassis, and then the Duquin chassis. And so those will be the 2 chassis, all powered by the same 5.6-liter Nissan-based power plant in the back.
Through the bus stop chicane, you can see that the pace vehicle, the light on top of it is off, so the team is going to double up now and come to the green flag. One of the other changes for this season, the 6-race series for the IMSA Prototype Challenge, is that all of the races will be 1 hour 45 minutes long. You see that up at the top of the screen. Down below on our ticker, you'll see the name of the organization that the car is campaigning under, and of course we'll keep you apprised of which drivers are behind the wheel. But for now, Maurice Krantz, he takes the number 21 car, and waiting for the green flag.
It's a slow start, Dave. He brings them down really slow. Duquin's on the front row. Both of those cars up front are the Duquin chassis, and then Ligier's filled the second row. And what we saw last year was the Duquin, which was the Norma chassis last year, seemed to take a little longer to get up to speed. We'll see if that's the case with the new aerodynamics that we have this year. Here we charge down into turn 1. Krantz is going to lose the position, or will he? Bold move there by Grant around the outside in that bright yellow number 40, but he can't hold it. And Krantz maintains the lead off of turn 2.
And the 2021 racing season is underway at the World Center of Racing, Daytona International Speedway.
Good stuff here, good battles, and really pretty bold. Qualifying was wet this morning, and so this is the first look today at a dry racetrack. The number 1, Naveen Rao, defending champion, he and Matt Bell a little bit further down the field right now than they would like. Back in 10th is where Rao qualified, their number 1. But you saw Keith Grant with that bold move around the outside. He just couldn't hold it, Dave, and I think perhaps these Michelin tires need just a little bit more pressure, a little bit more temperature if you want to run that high line into turn 1. Perhaps he can get it done at the end of the 2nd or 3rd lap, but not so much at the start. But Krantz isn't going to give him the opportunity, I don't think.
Very evenly matched cars. You see Krantz pulling out to quite a bit of a lead there. Keith Grant right behind him, and then Dan Goldberg in that blue and red number 6. Closing in now in a heavy braking zone. Doesn't have a chance to do it here. He'll fall in behind and hope for it on the banking.
I think what you really got to do as a driver, you had a wet qualifying session, so as the driver, the qualifying driver starts the car, this is your first look at the racetrack in the dry today. You need to see if the changes that the crew has made, your engineer has suggested, if they're going to work. And the racetrack's going to change throughout this hour and 40+ minute race, so it's one of those deals where you just need to get settled in. I think some of the young drivers, you were asking me about who drives in this class. You've got older, experienced drivers who don't make their living doing it, young drivers on their way up. So it is a broad dichotomy of different drivers in here. But for those young drivers, they need to understand this is not a 35-minute sprint race. and you've got a teammate that you need to hand a car over to. So
in one piece.
Preferably in one piece. So a lot of learning for the drivers and some of the teams as well. That's the great thing about this series. It is a ladder series, a stepping stone series, not only for the drivers, but for the teams as well.
Well, and the coolness, Brian. This is a prototype that will reach speeds of 180 miles per hour in the straight line. And a lot of you sports fans may not know, at one time I had aspirations of being behind the wheel, and Brian Till was my instructor in Skip Barber Racing School. Which is very interesting. We'll get back to that in a moment because there's been a little bit of contact on the track.
So Naveen Rao in the number 1, Alan Brynjolfsson in the bright yellow number 7 to the outside. Now it's interesting, take a look here as they come off the international hairpin, that contact that's made, Brynjolfsson on the outside. Every driver I've spoken to talks about the visibility or the lack thereof out of this new iteration of the LMP3 car. For safety reasons, the head restraint on the left side of the driver's head goes all the way to the dashboard now, and every driver I've spoken to said left side visibility is a big, big problem. And I wonder if in that situation for Naveen Rao, he simply lost sight of Alan Brynjolfsson out there to his left and slightly back a little bit, just didn't know he was there and tracked on all the way out. Or you can play devil's advocate and say he knew he was there and he drove him off. But I'm going to go with he couldn't see.
I wanted to, as we take a quick look here at Tristan Herbert in the 18 car today, paired with Jared Andretti. I want to get back to how you ruined my driving career. But this would have been something that if I had continued on, Brian, eventually there might have been an opportunity if I was good enough, if I was brave enough to race in a prototype. So for some of these drivers, this is their ultimate coolness. This is what they've been aspiring to, and now they're getting to do it at Daytona. Absolutely, just like the 43 right there. And Joe Robillard, a great job. Joe shares that car with Stephen McAleer, and McAleer, a former winner in this class. You used to be able to run it just by yourself if you were a silver driver. You can't do that anymore. But Joe Robillard's 57, Stephen McAleer in his 30s. He doesn't really want me to say just how old he is, but so for Joe Robillard, Joe does this for fun. Stephen does it as a career. So there is that driver pairing like you were talking about, which makes up a lot of this field. And for Joe Robillard, he says, hey guys, when he goes home on Monday, I raced my prototype at Daytona International Speedway this weekend and went 180 miles an hour and we finished here or whatever. And that's pretty cool for the guys at the country club, especially when you show them the picture. You can see the full course caution has come out. The Michelin ticker on the top of the screen there indicating yellow. We'll find out the reason for that. You know, Robillard's car, oh, and there it is right there. That's Ari Balog off in the 33. I wonder if that is there damage to the front splitter, it looks like? Not sure how that would have happened, but it looked like the front splitter may have been slightly askew. Ari sharing that car with his daughter, Natasha, or Tasha, as she is sometimes called. Yeah, the right front of the splitter has made contact with something, is kind of pushed up. But this is their debut in this class, and once again, these are serious race cars. Yeah. Ari, a good race car driver and good experience in GT-based machinery like in Michelin Pilot Challenge. But this is a completely different ball game, and I don't know how to describe it, Dave, other than to say that to come to grips, pardon the pun, literally with the aerodynamic downforce and the mechanical grip that these cars have, it takes a while, and as a driver, you've got to learn the difference between mechanical grip and aerodynamic grip. You've got to understand what the car will and won't do. Physics is still physics. When you're going fast and you have the downforce, it works for you, but when you get into the two hairpins where the speeds are 60 miles an hour and below, that downforce isn't there anymore. So you have to understand that it's something that works for you in certain areas of the racetrack and not in others. Cars have traction control. So learning how to use that traction control to your advantage and not to your detriment is another thing going on that they've got to work with. So is the throttle mapping that the driver can control on the steering wheel. So there is a lot being thrown at these drivers, even for a driver like Ari Balog, who has experience, a lot of experience driving, as I said, in GT-based cars. This is a different animal altogether. It's like flying your Cessna 150 and then going for a flight in an F-16. Ari Balog is making his way back to pit lane now in the 33 car. This is the 43 of Joe Robillard, and we had some smoke we thought we saw, Brian, off of the back of his car.
Yeah, I see that little puff right there, and it's hard to tell. We were just talking about downforce. That's in one of the highest speed areas of the racetrack, and also the banking. So the car not only is being compressed into the banking because of the aerodynamics and the high speed that we talked about, but it's also being compressed in because of the banking in and of itself. So that could just simply be smoke from the rub block underneath that chassis that we were seeing there. Hope so for Joe and Stephen McAleer that that's all it is.
Talk to me about the damage on the right front of that 33. Will he feel it, do you think, Brian? Will there be a point in the track, maybe at high speed, where there's any fluttering or anything like that? Does the crew need to seal that off, or what?
Yeah, that's going to have to be repaired, because that's an integral piece that not only directs air around the front of the car and gives you front downforce, but it also directs air through the side pods and under the car. It is a very important piece. They're going to have to take the nose off, and I would think they're going to change that front splitter, and that's going to take some time.
To work they go. Clock at the top. You see 1:36 remaining in this race, which is 1 hour 45 minutes scheduled. Brian mentioned earlier, qualifying took place in damp conditions, and the race is under cloudy skies. And you talked about the temperature of the tires, Brian. 60 degrees ambient temperature here. A cool day in Daytona.
Yeah, it is cool. And the other thing is it's Florida, so it's humid. You know, so it's one of those deals where we got this cool, moist air. It's going to take a couple of laps. And remember, this racetrack might be 3.56 miles long, and you've got the banking and this, that, and the other. But what temperature you gain on the infield, you lose when you get on the banking in those long straight line runs. So it takes several laps to get temperature in these Michelin tires, and we're back at it. What does Grant have for Krantz down at turn 1 this time? Is he going to try to go around the outside? No, he's not, but a little further back.
Whoa!
There we go.
Battle for fifth and a spin. Oh, and contact, big time contact.
Oh, and we were...
Joe Robillard got into him just as he was spun around, and 3 or 4 cars involved now.
Yeah, we were just talking about Joe Robillard and Stephen McAleer hopefully having a good day. I think that one has come to an end. With the 47 in the back and one of the Junior 3 entries, the number 3 involved as well. It was the 34 that had the initial spin.
Peter Ludwig.
And Robillard actually up in the air. He can't get those Michelins on the ground because of the 47 Motorsport entry there behind him has actually picked the rear tires up off the ground.
Ludwig gets it straightened around. Let's see how that happened. Down on the inside, Brian. Oh, he wanted to go. Yeah. The car in front was not.
He jumped back in the throttle, made contact, and when he made that contact, he had to lift. And as soon as he lifted, that transfers weight to the front, gives the front end good grip. The rear end comes around because you're already compromised. You're in the corner already. And now you're sitting in the mouth of the funnel, and everybody else is coming in. Take a look.
Tristan Herbert just gets a little wiggly in the green, black, and white car. And when Ludwig wanted to jump back in the gas, there was no place to go.
Yeah, and like I said, with the car bound up in cornering load, when he came off the throttle, that transferred weight to the front, dug that right front end even more, and the rear end began to step out. And Joe Robillard, not his day. We saw that smoke. I think that was just simple bottoming, but he was somewhat of an innocent bystander there. I don't know that he could have gotten around. And is the 6 involved as well, or is this a different problem?
Dan Goldberg slow there in the blue and red 6. Robillard's car, by the way, as they try to figure out what's happening with Goldberg, that's in NASCAR 1.
He's down on the apron. That's where you want to be. And he had a great run going. I was real impressed. Dan Goldberg had some great runs last year. He started teaming with Rasmus Lind at Sebring at the 2nd race of the season, and they had some good runs. I didn't see him involved with this. I wonder if he's got something mechanical going on.
I was mentioning the 43 of Robillard, that the cool paint scheme you see there. He is on the left in the 43. There's the 47 sitting there of Brownson. But that paint scheme, that's actually, you could call that a paint scheme versus a livery, because that's a painting that Robillard did himself. He says, my artwork on the race car. Meanwhile, 7 on pit lane as well.
Yeah, Brynjolfsson's a part of it. Let's take it back from the restart. Look a little bit further back. Go up front, you see
4th place car, the white and green, and then the red and white car, and then further back.
So The 18 has to check up a little bit because the car in front does. Boom, boom, boom. And you see what happens there. Brynjolfsson was involved a little bit. I think
Goldberg was ahead of this.
Yeah, Goldberg's ahead of all of that. Brynjolfsson's going to get right rear damage right there as he comes by. But it doesn't answer what happened to Dan Goldberg.
Taking a look, fanning out. This was the restart. The resumption of play, going not for the lead, but back in 5th position.
So the 4th car in the sequence is going to have to check up right there because Goldberg's in front of him. He has to check up. Chain reaction gets Ludwig, and then you see it all go downhill from there.
I wonder if Tristan checked up at all because Goldberg had some sort of issue. Sorry.
Well, and I was wondering that as well, Dave. That's a very valid point because Herbert looked like he had to check up because perhaps the 6 didn't, quote, go. You know, he didn't have the drive off the corner that he expected him to have, and that accordion effect just kind of built through the back. And this is not the debut that Alan Brynjolfsson and Trent Hinman wanted.
Brian, how do teams look at a situation like this? There is a championship. It's a 6-race championship. It's not the same level as, let's say, oh my goodness, and now Dan Goldberg is in the barrier. Hang on. Let's hold that previous thought. And Dan's going to hop out.
Yeah.
This went from questionable to a whole lot worse. And waving to the crowd there. There are a few fans on the grounds today. Yep, he's looking at it like, what in the world just happened?
You know what? And I love race fans. They're there to congratulate him, not giving him a hard time for some error that he made on the racetrack. They're clapping for him. They're saying, good job, and they want to talk to him.
And sorry you're out.
Yeah.
He certainly had one of the most recognizable cars on the racetrack. Performance Tech Motorsports fielding that car for Dan and Rasmus Lind.
Sports car fans are the best.
They really are.
Sorry, I'm going to get hate mail for that. I know.
Hey, why don't we say race fans in
race
general?
Race fans are the best.
I mean, they're just so into it. They're so into it.
I'm confused how this happened. I wonder if he did a little Control-Alt-Delete reset, got the car back up to speed, and as he was trying to catch up with the field, perhaps made this error. But that looks like, is that the International Horseshoe? I think it is.
Yep, it is. And going straight off like that, he would have had to, at that speed to cause that damage, Brian, you would have think he would have been applying power.
That's odd.
It is odd.
That's very odd.
I've never seen that.
And some more scars and scrapes. We had seen the 3 involved, one of the Junior 3 entries. We had seen that car involved a little bit, able to get back underway. And
Greg Palmer behind the wheel of that.
Interesting thing about Junior 3 this year, it's a family affair, right?
It is.
You and I were talking about that yesterday. So Greg and Eric Palmer in the 3. Greg is the father. Eric is the 21-year-old son. They get to share that. They shared that car last year. That was their debut season, 2020, in IMSA Prototype Challenge. And then you move over to the 33 with Ari Balog and his daughter Natasha, whom we were talking about earlier. So really cool. I used to hunt with my dad all the time. He was not a racer, and damage there to the 47. But just to be able to do those things with your family, and I think we need more of that these days, you know, where you spend the weekend with your family, not just with your friends out doing things, but with your family. And it's pretty cool to be able to, I thought it was cool to be able to hunt with my dad, but I'm thinking driving a race car might be on par with that.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a lot of damage.
That is a lot of damage.
I remember John Brownson, he was the car that was underneath the 43 of Robillard's, and that's where maybe got the attenuator through the nose of the 47 here.
And again, you were asking about drivers. John Brownson's 67 years old. Shares his car with Dario Cangialosi, who's 20 years old. Dario obviously wants a career in motorsports. John wants to have fun. John used to be a professional skier. He did downhill skis, but he also did speed skiing. He's been over 140 miles an hour on skis.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm going to dare to say he's more fit than you and I have ever been in our life, perhaps. He lives in Breckenridge, Colorado. He has a sauna built in his house. And he rides his stationary bike in his sauna at 10 or 11,000 feet, whatever altitude.
Acclimating. Just acclimating,
just
right?
Acclimating.
My gosh.
I would be dead after 5 minutes in the sauna in general. I would probably be out of breath just walking up the steps to try to find which floor in the house the sauna is on at 10,000 feet, much less riding my stationary bike in the sauna at 67 years old.
Yeah, up at about 5 feet is the 43 of Joe Robillard now on the rollback.
And so disappointing for this team. And I say that because they had some great runs last year, but they missed this race. They had bought a car, they brought it here, and it had some problems with the fuel injection system and actually ingested a bunch of trash into the engine, destroyed the engine, and they didn't make this race. And when you look at the championship results from last year, you know, as we have all done in our careers and in the racing world, the woulda, shoulda, couldas, and the what ifs, they would have been in a very different place in the championship at the end of the season instead of finishing 10th. If you just gave them 20 points or so for the race here, which would not have been a great finish, they would have been up in 3rd or 4th in the championship. So they had good finishes throughout the year, but missing this race was crucial. And that's what you were alluding to a moment ago, Dave, when we saw Alan Brynjolfsson sitting there in the Volt entry from Archangel there on pit lane. What do you do? Well, you hope in some way, shape, or form that other people can have problems along the way and that you'll have really good finishes and things will kind of even out in the end. But I mean, that is the issue with a 6-race championship. You don't have time for mistakes. You need to make sure that you collect points and you finish races all along the way. I was talking to Jared Andretti this morning, and we were talking about that team and those drivers getting acclimated to these cars, and he goes, "Don't make fun of me if I'm not doing too well." And I said, remember, the big payday, so to speak, is at the end of the season. It's not at the end of the day. And I think that's so hard as competitors like Jared is. He's such a competitor. It's so hard to accept a finish that's not on the podium or that's not a win. But in the end, when you realize that all those points really do matter, you need to go, all right, then I'm going to get as many points as I can. My good friend Dorsey Schrader always says, you finish 3rd in a 3rd place car, you won. You know, if you finish 3rd in a 1st place car, well, you didn't do your job.
Nope.
And if you finish 1st in a 3rd place car, somebody obviously had a problem in front of you, and good on you. You had a little good luck that day, but know what you have, collect the points, and move on. You always go out on the racetrack to win, always. But at some point in time, when you realize that maybe things aren't gonna work out your way, you take the best that you can get. If you go to your favorite restaurant and order that steak that you love so much and they're out of it that day, I don't think, I mean, maybe you do, you don't get up and leave.
I'm not that snooty, but I might. It's a possibility. It depends on my mood for the day, Brian.
Yeah, you take the filet instead. You were wanting the porterhouse.
That's right.
You take the filet instead.
Field circulating under caution still, full course caution here. Hour 45 minutes, the length of the race. We're down to 1:24. You see the lights came back on top of the Lexus IS350 Sport, and they will take him around again. I was going to ask you, Brian, we mentioned Jared Andretti waiting to get behind the wheel of the 18 that Tristan Herbert is driving right now in 3rd place. What about the driver exchange today? When do you expect driver number 2, whether it's the more experienced or less experienced, getting in for the latter stages of the race? When do you expect to be at halfway, something different than that?
Well, so you've got a 40-minute minimum drive time. So you have to be in the car, regardless, bronze, silver, you have to be in the car for at least 40 minutes in order to score points. Second driver cannot be in the car for any more than 65 minutes. So if you add up 65 and 40, you can kind of see, you don't have a huge window in the middle to make up your mind as to when you're going to do the driver change. On top of that, without yellows, the average fuel run right now seems to be right at an hour, maybe a little bit less. So you couldn't really hope to go more than an hour anyway. So when you start backing that down, you see that you've got a pretty narrow window there where you're going to do that driver change. I mean, you could come in, you could leave the first driver in for 60 minutes, but then you've got to get the next driver in for their 40. So make sure that you get that done. I mean, the window is, if you look at it that way, you could go 40 minutes or you can go 60 minutes. So you've got a pretty large gap there in the middle, but understanding that the car won't really go more than about 60 minutes on a load of fuel, and you really only want to do that one stop, that's what narrows down your window.
So doing the math here, which has never been one of my strong suits, I'm looking at the clock at the top. If we get down to 1:05 to go, and we haven't put in our one of our drivers yet, that window opens for max time, right? 65 minutes, it could open at that point. So that's one of the, if I want to put markers out that I can actually find later, there's one I'm finding.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at this race and you go, okay, well, how long is it? Well, it's an hour and 45 minutes long. So if the first driver runs for 40 minutes, and it's not when the driver gets out of the car. It's not when the next driver gets in the car. It's when the car crosses the control line at pit in. That's when your drive time stops. And your drive time starts when you cross the control line at pit out. So it's not like they sit and watch the car stop and then, you know, go, okay, that's when it ends. So you have to factor that pit lane time in as well. And that pit lane time on your pit stop where you're going to be taking fuel, it's 115 seconds is the minimum that you can spend on pit lane. So
there's pit in, Brian. So this is where your drive time would stop.
That's where it stops. And like I said, there is a minimum pit stop time of 115 seconds. So the crews have to factor that in. It's real easy to sit and kind of get an idea of when you can come in and the latest you could come in and that, but you need to factor in those times that we don't see. And you don't think it's a big deal, but races have been won and lost by drive time being over or under by just a few seconds. The teams have programs and the ability to look at monitors on their timing stand to know exactly when their time stopped and so on and so forth. And, you know, for the driver who's going to be in for an hour, well, they don't have to worry about him not getting minimum time. They have to worry about him leaving pit lane too soon. Although I don't think that's really a consideration, because if that second driver, you're not going to send him out where he's going to have to come in for a splash of fuel. You may cut it really closely at the end. They're what they call the RFID readers.
The green paddles there.
Yep. So that's where the speed limit stops, and that's where the line is. But the other thing that you see there on the Michelin box there are readers in those boxes. And the tires that you use for qualifying have an RFID sensor in them. And when you go through those sensors to head out onto the racetrack for the start of the race, they better match the tires that were on the car when you went out for qualifying. And the next set of tires that go on, if they do a tire change, need to be a registered set to that car. If they're not, the officials will know it immediately.
Michelin tire specialists up and down pit road already this weekend. They've been involved since Friday. Well, actually before that, but Friday the Roar started. WeatherTech Championship Series on track and practicing for the Roar race on Sunday. And of course, these IMSA prototype challenge cars have been on track practicing. A couple of practice sessions, a quick qualifying session to set the field for today. And this hour and 45-minute race, now about 25 minutes old, 26 minutes. Under caution for a big melee coming out of turn 1 and 2, where a few cars got together. You see the damage on Brynolfsson's car there, and the lights are still ablaze on top of the pace car. Incident we're talking about, Brian, was a bit of a mess.
Yeah, understatement to say the least. There's where it all goes bad. Brynolfsson, that bright yellow car goes by, and I think, you know what? I want to see that from the front angle again. Does his damage actually come from this incident? I don't think it does. His damage comes from contact that's going to happen downstream, either going into the International Horseshoe or some other place on the racetrack before we went full course caution. So he wasn't a victim of that incident per se, but I think it put him in a place where somebody had a shot at him.
He was left vulnerable, and perhaps some contact throughout the cooling down lap. The caution didn't come out immediately, but when it did, everyone, of course, slowed down to save pace.
All right, this is going to be an interesting restart because Moritz Krantz in the 21, Keith Grant in the 40, they have experience in these cars, in this class, in this type of racing. So does Naveen Rao right behind him. He is the defending champion along with Matt Bell in this class, but the third car in line, Tristan Herbert, a good race car driver, and certainly knows the sport. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but he doesn't know these cars, and you see Rao trying to take advantage around the outside.
Tried to make that black and green and white 18 a little bit wide. That's going to be just enough to keep Rao behind for the moment. That's
impressive right there on the part of Tristan Herbert. This Andretti Autosport team just got this car, and that.
And Naveen Rao takes the one too far into the International Horseshoe and takes out both himself and Herbert.
And that was not impressive. We were just talking about what was. Well, now we can talk about what isn't. Now it's going to be difficult to get these cars back underway. And had a good look at both sides of the car since they've been spinning around in circles there. They don't seem to have a lot of damage on them. But I wonder if Naveen Rao's experience allowed him to go a little deeper in the brake zone, but the opportunity just isn't there. Herbert's already turned in to enter the corner, and Rao has way too much speed. I don't think if Herbert was there, Rao was going to make the corner anyway.
No. And he wasn't certainly crowding the apex by any means, the 18 car, so plenty of room to race there, but Rao just took it too far. That'll be a local caution. Both cars got back underway. Caution lifted there, and the field continues under green with Krantz out ahead.
Be interesting to see what Todd Snyder, who's the race director, and his group of driver advisors have to say in race control about that, and see if there will be a penalty on Rao for avoidable contact. Tell you what, this is going to move the 54 up, I believe. I think Josh Sarze was able to get through that mess, and he should be up to third, I think, as you watch a good battle here. 74 on driver's left. Jason Ray, who had problems in qualifying in the wet, got into the wall in turn one. That 47 Motorsports team got it back together and have gotten him back on track. The car looks to be in good shape in the 81 just in front.
That's Mel Johnson, the black car,
who has no experience in these cars either. So two rookies in this class. Mel Johnson, LB Cup champion in Lamborghini Super Trofeo from 2019. This is a completely different package that he's used to driving. The Lamborghini Super Trofeo car certainly is a rocket ship in a straight line, but it has anti-lock brakes in addition to traction control. So he doesn't have the anti-lock brakes here, but he does have the TC, and another good battle just a little bit further forward.
Yeah, that was for 6th. This is for 4th. Thomas in the 11, the blue and black car, and Ludwig, who had the spin that started the big melee, coming back through.
Yeah, Ludwig able to work his way back through. Thomas, the 2020 IPC bronze champion.
Holding tough on the outside, Brian.
This is going to be interesting here. This is two Duquesne chassis, so they both have the same aerodynamic signature. The question is, how much downforce are you running on that rear wing? It's really the only thing you want to mess with here. And what that's going to do is going to affect not only the straight line speed, it's going to affect your braking capability, but the other thing that it can do is if you try to trim too much out, it can increase some tire degradation on the rear tires because you don't have that downforce in the back anymore. And later in the stint, that tire degradation could certainly affect your braking down into the heavy braking zones, like into turn one in the bus stop.
And I don't know if I'm going a wrong direction here, but remember how quickly the 34 rear end came around in that melee, so not a lot of downforce?
Well, it could be, but I think that's a situation of really colder tires because that was early on. You've got to look at a Duquesne chassis in the hands of the 46 there, and right behind the Ligier, so Jason Ray, or I'm sorry,
Steve Scullins in the green and white car there.
And the Scullins in the green and white car, that's right. He's in the Duquesne, and then right behind him, the 3 of Greg Palmer, the 2 different manufacturers. You can tell by looking at the nose, the Duquesne has that narrow nose, and the Ligier is slightly more rounded in the center section. But the other thing that you can tell is when you watch him go by, the Duquesne is, I call it a single gill. right behind the front wheel, you'll see a single gill. It's a double gill aerodynamic opening there on the Ligier chassis. Other than that, from afar, they look really, really close. You see the Ligier also has the 2 down posts that go down to the front splitter, a little bit easier to see there on the white number 3, just behind the 46, the green and white Duquesne of Scullin.
Real quickly, we saw Naveen Rao going through pit lane for a drive-through penalty for that move in the International Horseshoe. And too many men over the wall working on the 7 of Brynjolfsson, so he will do a drive-through penalty as well. But we saw that very aggressive move by Rao, the champion from last year, Brian, going into the International Horseshoe on Tristan Herbert. And IMSA was not pleased with that.
I didn't think they would be. I've known Todd for a long time, and he and I were going through the rule book the other day and really kind of trying to get into his mind as to what he sees and wants to see as a race director. I'm a race director in another series, and I have my opinions, my thoughts, and the things that I want to see in the way I call a race. We all do it just slightly differently, but I thought Todd and I might see that one kind of the same. So turns out we did.
3 car now with trouble. No power or something coming out of turn 2.
And that's not where you really want to stop it, because the cars track out there. There'll be a yellow in turn 1 notifying the drivers there's been an issue there. But for the 3, that's just kind of a dead stick. It reminds me of what we saw with the 6.
In the sense that,
remember when we saw Dan Goldberg just come to a stop on the apron coming out of turn 6 back onto the super speedway, and it seems kind of the same thing here, a little control alt delete. Now we talked about talked about this being a new car. Here were your choices. If you owned a prototype challenge car, a 2020 prototype challenge car, you could buy an update kit to it. It updated the aerodynamics. You maintain the 5-liter engine, but you got a different throttle body, air restrictors, and software to increase the horsepower that would match the 5.6-liter in the 2020 in the new spec car. Interesting that both cars that we've seen shut down are both new spec cars. They're brand new cars with the 5.6 power plant. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the engine. A lot of these cars were delivered late, so they haven't been able to, some of them have not been able to have been gone through the way the teams would like to have done them. And I wonder if that's what we're seeing there perhaps on those 2 cars, both Ligier chassis and both of the latest iterations. So interesting. It'll be interesting to dig into that post-race and see if the issues were the same.
The German Moritz Kranz continues to lead in the blue and white 21, just a little under an hour 10 left in the Scouts of America 145. Dave Burns with you here along with Brian Till, watching the IMSA Prototype Challenge. Drivers of different amateur and semi-professional levels competing in very similar race cars on one of the greatest stages in the world for racing, Daytona International Speedway.
Keith Grant and his brother David having a good run. They had some great runs last year. They've moved teams this year in their 40, entering over to JDC Motorsports, and that very familiar, I don't know if they own the patent on this yellow color, but it's banana boat, whatever you want to call it. It is bright yellow, and the Grants have slid right in there. They had some great runs last year on pole a couple of different times, but just couldn't seal the deal. They would make a mistake, and both of them did it. So I'm thinking at Thanksgiving, it's not one brother that could say to the other one, hey, you ruined my season, because they both did it. But they're 2 very talented drivers. Keith is 47, he's the older brother. David's 44. They were 8th in the championship last year, but they know how to drive. They spent a lot of time driving Atlantic cars over the last decade or so, running in different championships that run the Atlantic cars. A car with pretty good horsepower, pretty good downforce, and a fair amount of tire on it. These cars are quite similar, but this was a way that they could get rid of 2 cars and go to 1 and share it as brothers. And again, another one of those who's driving these cars stories. There you go.
A couple of brothers from Germantown, Tennessee, driving for JDC, the John D. Church group up in Minneapolis, and fielding that bright yellow number 40. Currently running in the second position, trying to catch Moritz Kranz, but 9.3 seconds behind. This is the best battle on the racetrack right now. This is for third. A move to be made as they get ready to head on to the banking of Daytona, and that will be Ari Balog giving way in the black and yellow 33. Scooting through, that was a 54 of Sarche.
Peter Ludwig is on a charge. You said it earlier, Dave, after that problem that he had. He's charging forward. Josh Sarge in front. First race in one of these cars. He's sharing the 54 with Dakota Dickerson, who finished second in the championship last year. You've got a Ligier in the hands of Sarge, the 54, trying to keep that Duquesne of Peter Ludwig behind him, but Sarge is one of those young drivers that I talked about earlier. He's used to 35-minute sprint races. He ran last year in the FR series in SCCA Pro Racing, essentially an F3 car. So he's used to cut and thrust, get it done now. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. And what he's got to come to grips with mentally, and I talked to Dakota about this, is that he said he's got the maturity. I hope he just has the patience. So, because if you do get into this type of battle where you've got a faster car or a more experienced driver behind you, giving up one position that your teammate may well be able to get back is one thing. Trying to hold your position because you're not going to lose one, that's the mindset of a Formula car driver. At this stage of a sports car race, that can't be your mindset. Hold on to what you can. Don't give up anything needlessly, for sure. And like I said, you always want to win the race, but you've got to know and you've got to understand fully what you're capable of and what you've got underneath you as far as a car goes. You cannot throw it away. And I'm impressed with Sarge. I really am. The job that he's doing, he's running good lap times. It looked like Ludwig was going to catch him up and chew him up and spit him out, kind of like he did with Balog, but nothing doing right now.
Balog, of course, was not on the lead lap there, to just clarify a little bit, but these two were battling, and you see the black and white car of Sarche call Scottsdale home, and his teammate Dakota Dickerson from San Diego waiting to get aboard. And Brian, we're coming up on that 1:05 mark that we talked about. The window could open for a driver to jump in and not exceed the 65-minute maximum drive time at this point. And what did you tell me? What do you think? Did you do any recalculating on the fuel, Brian, when these guys need to stop?
You're,
after all that caution.
You're asking me to do math. Yeah. I mean, I just know what they can.
I thought you were better than me.
No, I'm absolutely no better than you. But think of it this way. Your bronze driver started. Your silver driver should be your faster driver. They're going to finish this race. As long as things are kind of the way they are right now, Krantz with a 13-plus second lead over Grant. Grant's kind of sitting out there on his own. Sarge and Ludwig have a good battle going. Stephen Thomas is a little bit further back. But right now, you kind of sit here and go, these drivers are doing a good job. Let's let them keep going just a little bit longer. And then that way, when we put our faster drivers in, you don't want to wait till the bitter end, because then they won't have time to show what they can do. But at the same point in time, you want to leave them tires and fuel at the end so they can do what they can do. So I would expect to see it before too long. These guys have been out there. They had a long yellow period. That I understand. But I can tell you that drivers like Dakota Dickerson, he wants in. He wants in that 54, and Krantz doesn't want to get out of the 21 because he's laying down some spectacular lap times. That's the only thing I can see if I'm with the 54, if I'm at MLT, I might be sitting there going, come on, let's think about this. Eric Van Bibber, who's the team manager there, it may be one of those deals where they're looking at it going, they're laying down lap times and pulling away right now from us. They're about a second quicker every lap. The sooner we could get Dakota in, the more experienced driver, maybe we could close into that gap. So they're sitting down there watching the gaps and watching the lap times, and they'll make the decisions.
Take a look at what happened to Tristan Herbert, getting ready to get back onto the banking, thinking of making a move. It looks like he's trying to get and overcooks it.
Yeah, that little move to the left kind of gets down to the inside. No harm, no foul.
and then around he goes.
Well, there was that. I didn't see that part.
That was the foul.
That was the foul. So you get in there, you make that little move to the left, and by doing it, you're turning the wheel to the left, which makes the left side a little bit lighter. And if you go to the brake too soon, you don't have even downforce and even weight across the front. Really easy to lock that left front, which is exactly what he did. He needed to get over there, get it level, get it settled again before you use that kind of brake pressure. But
made the Michelins a little bit angry, but other than that, the 18 turns it around and continues. Brian, one other point on when you put in the silver driver. Let's be honest, the bronze drivers, they have a little investment in the program here, and you want to let them have fun. They're here for a race at Daytona.
Some of them have a little more investment than others, absolutely. And it really depends on how the deal is structured. You know, it may very well be that one of those drivers is helping fund things a little bit more than the other, and there are other drivers who say, I don't care, I want to win, you know, give me my best shot. I'm invested in this program, but
I'd also rather have a trophy.
I want to win this thing. So none of these drivers came here to drive around Daytona and say, gee, isn't this fun? They came here to try to win, so they'll do what they need to. I would not be surprised to see the 18 on pit lane pretty soon, because they're within the window to make it. And I think most importantly, I think Herbert has a pretty good flat spot. Pretty good flat spot on that left front. Actually, they probably need a couple more laps. We still have over an hour to go. So, and guys were saying 55 minutes to an hour on fuel. I would assume they're on the radio with Tristan saying, you need to endure this for a couple more laps to ensure that we get to a place that we can get to the end of the race on fuel and tires. But I guarantee you, his hands are like on a paint shaker at Sears. I'm pretty sure the steering wheel's giving him some pretty significant feedback right now, because I think there's a pretty large flat spot on that left front, and the flat spots don't go away. What happens is when you lock that brake, it literally just shaves the rubber off of it, and it makes a flat spot on the tire. And if you've ever had one of those shopping carts at the grocery store, the thumper carts, as I call them, you know, all the way through, it's kind of like that. Except when you get on the brakes, the wheel wants to roll back to that flat spot and stay. And so it just gets worse and worse and worse. You have to begin to back your braking up more and more, and it becomes problematic. So I would think as soon as the window opens for the 18, you'll see him on pit lane.
Nice scrap here for 10th position. The bright green number 86 of Terry Olson, fending off the charge of Bruce Hamilton in the 60, that black car. Brian, these are both the P3 versions, 3-2 version.
Easy for you to say.
It wasn't. From last year, grandfathered in with a couple of changes so that they could stay in the series this year. They will not be allowed to race this model next year, but a good scrap for 10th.
You know, Bruce Hamilton is another one of those guys, like John Brownson, love him. And I'm going to say what I said about John Brownson about Bruce Hamilton. He's probably in better shape than both you and I combined at any time in our life. He's 71 years old.
Unbelievable.
And these cars are physical. They have high downforce, high horsepower. They create a lot of G's under braking and in cornering. He's doing a great job. And when he hands that 60 over to Tony Kazimierz has been the class of the P3-2 field all weekend long, and I would expect that. Look at this.
Trying to make up ground that was lost. Tristan Herbert on the outside, the left-hand car, the 18, trying before they get to turn 1 to get by Scullin. He's not going to be able to do it. Scullin's going to hold him off. What about the exit of the turn?
Problem is that left front. I mean, he's closed down on him. Problem is you can't attack in the brake zone the way you want to with that flat spot on the left front. You got to be really, really cautious. You get in a place like this and you lock the left front, it's going to slide up and in. But you can see how gingerly he's handling that car there in the brake zone, knowing just a little more pressure, I can puff that left front. It's going to create a problem. He works his way past Scullin. Good job by Herbert.
Steve knew he was there. Gave a little bit of racing room in the International Horseshoe. And now Herbert gains one of those positions you were talking about as he gets set to hand the wheel to young Jarrett Andretti. Of course, this car fielded by Andretti Motorsport this year. Uncle Mike happy to be on board with his nephew's effort. We'll talk more about him later in the show for sure, but a great-looking race car. Taking a look at the past, Brian.
So you saw it start back in turn 1. He was really, really cautious on the brakes, and he's going to kind of probe down to the inside and look. And you can actually see him kind of on and off the brakes a little bit if you watch the car and the way the rake of the car, or how it tilts, changed. Herbert was actually in there on the brakes. He got off of him a little bit. He wasn't sure if he wasn't right on the edge. It's kind of that back and forth. And he really wanted to make sure that Scullin knew he was there. And I think he did a great job. Scullin certainly kind of realized that he was there. He sensed him, and Tristan Herbert wasn't going to make a mistake again. They got through there cleanly, but you could tell he was just very, very gingerly treading into those braking zones. That's going to be the difficulty right now for Tristan Herbert, is the inability to attack. See that left front?
Our production crew is so stout. I heard the audio of barking tires, and unfortunately that was the 47 of John Brownson going around, already 2 laps off the pace. He gets it corrected, and there's Brownson's car going the right direction, and Herbert going by him.
And you know, back to, it just kind of sticks in my mind. I think it's great that you're getting initiated into the IMSA Prototype Challenge stuff, because it is such a diverse series. We were talking about Steve Scullin, and you think about the drivers in this field, and you were like, well, who are they? Well, Steve Scullin is president of corporate operations for Fidelity Investments. So there's a guy with some brain power. Naveen Rao is a neuroscientist, an AI developer, a processor architect. There are some really smart people out here, and I think that's the cool thing about motorsports. It offers a challenge to these businessmen who are involved in these high intellect businesses, because they can take that cerebral approach, and that's exactly what Naveen Rao did to win the championship last year with Matt Bell. He said, this is not what I do, teach me. You know, just like he was taught getting his PhD in neuroscience. You know, it was teach me, I want to learn, I want to learn. Now, yeah, they have to be able to then take those lessons and apply them on the racetrack, and not everybody can, but many of these high-end executives, this is kind of a release for them. Some of it is what they do in their business life, and then they get to amplify it a little bit more. Amplifying things right now is Hamilton, who wants to find a way around Olsen, but look just behind them, that's the number 7. Alan Brynjolfsson with that damage to the right rear. He's out there saying, hey, you know what? It may be torn up, but we're going to get some experience. We're going to get some mileage, and we're going to get some points like we talked about.
That's right. Trent Hinman waiting on deck to take over the 7, and around goes Olsen. Hamilton will finally find his way by, but a mistake by the driver of the 86 will give them that opportunity. I wonder how much pressure was coming from behind with Bryn Olsen there, but the 86 just spinning and looping it in the International Horseshoe.
Yeah, for Bruce Hamilton, it could have been the 7 moving up on him that creates the incident, because I'm sure the spotters on the radio saying, no, you know, you got to go, 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 people are coming. And he just gets it around. And you're like, well, how does he do that? They have traction control. Well, traction control is all well and good, but like I always say, physics is physics. Traction control helps. It helps keep the wheels from spinning. That can keep the rear from moving out. That's fine, but if you carry too much speed in there and you're right on the edge, even the traction control isn't going to help you. It's just like you can't drive up to a wall at 100 miles an hour with a car with anti-lock brakes and go, but I've got anti-lock brakes. Well, yeah, you do, and they won't lock up when you hit the wall, but if you go too deep, you're going to hit the wall, because the car just can't slow down.
See some raindrops on our camera lens there in the Western Horseshoe.
Oh, that'll make it fun.
Yes, it will. And no, this series, Brian, will they run with the rain tires? I believe they will, because I think you called a whole race last year that they were under wet conditions most of the time.
They certainly will, and that's where the traction control settings will come in handy. You see Hamilton there being passed, and there are 8 different traction control settings on the wheel that these drivers can use, not on the Dash 2 cars, though. I just realized that.
Okay.
The Dash 2 cars don't have traction control, so that's why we saw that hurry there for Olsen. He's trying to get out of the way. He's trying to go, and he gets in, lights up the rear tires, and that's why he goes around. So no traction control on the Dash 2. So
time for Dario Cangelowski to hop in the 47. John Brownson hopping out after that incident on track earlier. Cangelowski, the driver from Chester, New Jersey, will have his time at the wheel of the Duquesne. One of the first ones to hit pit road and start this process, Brian, just under an hour remaining in the Scouts of America 145. 34 on pit road, driver change there as well. This will be Peter Ludwig getting out. James French from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, jumping in, well-known name in sports car racing here in the States.
And very familiar with prototype challenge machinery, back to the open cockpit prototype challenge cars that they ran. He actually won here, Rolex 24 in one, and Sebring as well, a champion in that category. So he understands this class. He's also the Asian Le Mans Series champion in the LMP2 category for 2020. So experience is certainly something that James French has. Brynjolfsson and Rao side by side. The damage there on the 7, that bright yellow car has to be shaking that car at high speed. You can see the body panels just moving around.
This is the car that just spun. That was Terry Olson. Bob Iverson now climbing in, the Florida resident, and he'll now reside behind the wheel of this P3-2 car. You know, the other factor there, I don't know if you mentioned it, Brian, but obviously end of tire life was coming for the 86 car, so a little bit less grip there coming out of the International Horseshoe.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'll eat some crow there. And
oh, no crow. No crow needed.
No, I'll apologize to Terry. I apologize, Terry. But
Jared Andretti getting into the 18 on the right side of the screen there you saw, and behind him that was the 46. Steve Scullin hopping out, Scott Huffaker getting in, and the 11 is on pit road.
But again, I would think that that pressure of Brynjolfsson beginning to move through really had those guys trying to get off the hairpin. So this is what I expected to see, and now what you're going to see is, in theory, the faster of the two driver pairing behind the wheel. Now it'll be interesting to see how the pit stops go. There is a minimum time that you can spend on pit lane, 115 seconds from the lines that we talked about at the beginning, the line at pit in, the line at pit out, but you still want to get this stop done and done well. Only 3 men over the wall, 1 air gun.
And part of the reason there, Brian, is to save getting a high-priced, high-speed pit crew.
Absolutely.
And perhaps the associated equipment that goes with it. So even that out for everyone here. You see the driver change on the 11. It was just a drink bottle. Stephen Thomas stays in. He's going to run the entire hour 45.
As a bronze, he can do that, and he's an interesting guy. He's an attorney out of LA.
Leaders in, Brian, by the way.
And just so focused. He's driven probably 15 different types of cars over the last 2 years. He's only been racing for 2 years. He wants to do this. He's worked with Ross Bentley, and they have come up with a plan to make him a good race car driver. And you know how you get to be a good race car driver? You spend the entire hour and 45 minutes behind the wheel. 21.
Seat time, seat time, seat time. Seat time has been great for Moritz Kranz, and he will now hop out of the car. Lawrence Hare, we decided we were going to call him, like Irv Hare. Lawrence Hare from Stuttgart, he will get behind the wheel, and so this all-German driver lineup, been the class of the field so far. Many seconds out ahead. The lead was as much as about 14 seconds to the good.
Second place, the Grant brothers up top in their JDC entry. And once again, these pit stops look a little bit more calm, and they can be. You've got that minimum time, but expect Lawrence Hare to be wickedly fast. The 2019 and 2020 champion in the Michelin Le Mans Cup Series in Europe in the LMP3 machine. So he knows these cars very well. Also experience in Porsche 911 RSRs with Team Project One during the 2019 and 2020 World Endurance Championship season. So a very, very talented young driver, just 23 years old, and almost a lifetime of experience behind him at only 23. He's going to be a rocket ship.
Imagine that. Behind one of these rocket ships on the track today. Again, these are the IMSA Prototype Challenge cars, the P3 division. We will see this car, not these particular ones, not these particular chassis, Brian, but this class will be in the Rolex 24 next weekend as well.
It will, and I think it's really going to make the Rolex 24 very interesting, because not only is there another class car, they have a different personality than any of the other cars that are out there. That was close.
Yes, it was. The nervous announcer said in unison. Naveen Rao now gets the one into the pit box there, but the leader nearly with an incident on pit road.
We'll need to do that in harmony next time, because that was in step for sure.
Watch this.
Now,
who was in the right and who was maybe should have thought twice about that? I guess if you're the leader, you got to be careful, right?
I would need to see a broader picture of it, and I want to see the guy who releases the 21, and I want to see where the 1 is. I mean, you could call that an unsafe release if the team knows, and the team should know. When they are looking down the lane, they should know whether the car that they see in the fast lane has pitted up the lane in front of them and is on the way out, or if is pitted downstream from them and is on the way in. They should know that before they release it. It really is their responsibility to know where that car is going to fit in, and that time it almost didn't fit in. They dodged a bullet there.
James French in the red and white 34 getting around the blue and black 11 of Stephen Thomas. That was for second. We talked about Stephen staying in the race car, Brian. Hour 45 minutes, 2 stints on the tires. Similar to what some of the drivers might experience next week at the Rolex 24 in a way.
I'm impressed with what he's done and what they're doing. We talked about this earlier, he was the bronze champion last year, and this track time is what makes him a better race car driver. As we said, 53-year-old guy, and has just taken to this and wants to be better and better and better. He's also running the Rolex 24.
So there you have it. This is a warm-up.
In an LMP2 machine.
Next week, 5 classes in the Rolex 24. The LMP3s added for the first time. Here's a replay down in the International Horseshoe. Jared Andretti looking for a way to go.
Yeah,
contact.
Well, that was odd. I mean, he's on it, and so is the car in front of him, and his eyes are up, and he's looking off the corner, and he's like, it's go time. He's in the throttle trying to drive the car off the corner, and all of a sudden, the closing gap to Courtney Crone just in front becomes very, very quick. And for Courtney, she may have just gotten in the car, and so that may be a deal where Jared had been in for a lap, and he thought that car was up to speed, but he's trying to drive it off the corner at speed, and Courtney just trying to get the wheels underneath her. And talk about talented young drivers. I mean, you go back to what you were saying, who runs in this category? Well, Courtney Crone, 19 years old, and I was talking to Garrett Clutchian, who's the team owner at 47 Motorsports this morning, and he said, you're going to see this young lady in the future a lot. She's been racing since she was 4 years old, and she has raced everything. Flat track motorcycles, midgets on dirt, midgets on asphalt. She's raced before the night before the 500 this last year. She qualified 3rd in a midget there, finished 6th. She's been a candidate for Team USA scholarship, invited by the International W Series to test a Formula 3 car. And she does everything on her own. Garrett said, she flew here on her own. He said, I had to go to the hotel with her. I had to drive down and get there a day ahead of when I planned to be there, because she couldn't check into the hotel because she's 19 and she needed somebody to help her check into the hotel. But she did the contract on her own. Her father's a racer, and they support her. He said, but she is very determined and very focused on her career. And I said to him, there are young drivers that I've looked at in the past. I actually had a conversation with one last year, and I looked him in the eye and I said, you need to tell me, who wants you to be a race car driver more, you or your parents? You need to make this decision, because much like baseball or anything else, a lot of kids get pushed because their parents want them to do it. It's a dream that they wanted. He said, oh no, that is not her. Her father is a racer. But yeah, she had just come out of the pit lane, I believe.
This was, this was the incident with the contact happened.
Right.
There was also an incident where she blew turn 1, getting used to this car. I want to tell you what I'm most impressed with. The right rear tail light is still illuminated and attached at this point.
They're going to need...
barely. There it is.
Well, there it goes. I was going to say they were going to need to bring it in and have that fixed because it was going to come off.
And there it is.
Well, that saved a trip down pit lane.
Now, it is on the apron, so IMSA may not have any issue with that. She'll be able to continue running in that day glow and black, number 74. That's Courtney Crone. And taking over for Jason Rabe, the Californian, jumping in for the New York native.
It was interesting, too. Gary Kletchian was saying that Courtney's time right now in this car, it's all lost in high aero settings. Heavy braking into turn 1, the higher speed corners. She's not driven a car with this kind of downforce, and it's something that she's going to have to learn and how to adapt to it. I don't think the horsepower is anything that's an issue, or the speed or anything else. I mean, there are pictures of her when, I would say probably 4 or 5 years ago, as a much younger young lady in the leathers with the steel boot on and the motorcycle sideways going around a flat track, and I'm just sitting there thinking, who would ever let their daughter do that? But I do think that all those experiences make you a better race car driver. You know, I think at some point in time you have to focus and decide what your career path is going to be, and you take those experiences and you apply them and you become a champion. And like Chase Elliott was saying in an interview the other day that we listened to, he said, you know, it's time now that I've checked off some of these other boxes. Certainly I want to win more championships, but I want to experience other things, you know, and I think that experience makes you a better, more complete race car driver. And I think he's right.
David Grant in that yellow 40, he's being chased by the 11 of Stephen Thomas. Thomas stayed in the car. Keith Grant gave way to brother David. And now David will take it home, presumably. Just over 40 minutes left here in the Scouts of America 145 from Daytona International Speedway. The IMSA Prototype Challenge kicking off the racing portion of the Roar Before the 24, a testing session which began back in the mid-2000s to get ready for the Rolex 24 at Daytona, one of the world's most prestigious motorsports races, certainly the crown jewel of the IMSA series in North American sports car racing. And they will be followed by a qualifying race, the Multi 100, to determine the starting lineup for the Rolex 24. And then just 1 week, Brian, before some of these drivers in the IMSA Prototype Challenge and all their compatriots in the WeatherTech Sports Car Championship will take on the Rolex 24. Used to be about 3 weeks in between. Now just 7 days, so it's going to happen fast down here in Florida.
I mean, there were years where the Roar was like on the 2nd of January, and there were still a lot of people in pain.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and so it got moved, you know, like a week later, and then there was this awkward time between. It was like, okay, well, now we've got a weekend open in between, but it wasn't enough time for teams to go back to shops across the country and that kind of stuff. So that was awkward. And by moving it to this weekend, I think you see great things. One, you see great racing, which the fans love, and it kind of starts that big-time racing in North America. But the other thing that it does, it allows the series to run like we're going to see later today on Saturday, the qualifying race, or tomorrow, I should say, for the WeatherTech Championship, the qualifying race. So more racing for the fans, and teams just roll the cars back into the garage, get them prepped for the race the next weekend, and off you go. And it kind of compacts everything, helps with travel costs and expenses and all kinds of things. It keeps a pretty intense 10 days of motorsports.
Good action here on the track. That's the lap car, by the way, the damaged number 7 that Trent Hinman is piloting around now, the Dayglow yellow and black car, the 46 being driven by Scott Huffaker, and then behind them, Tonise Kazimetz in that 60. You mentioned it, Brian. He was going to be coming through the field. this action on track happening while the leader has been warned. Brian, you mentioned being released from pit road was a bit of an issue, and they got a warning from IMSA for an unsafe release.
I would think that they would have. And I think the problem was he was told to go and didn't. There was a crew member, and you can see with his hand on the radio. Now take a look at the crew member in the blue. You see him saying, go, go,
Spinning,
go.
yep.
But then they're holding the board in front of him, and the man with the board seems to be unsure. Well, I think the crew chief wanted the car gone.
Yep. Well, and they continue to lead with Lawrence Hare at the helm, that blue and white car coming up on lap traffic. This is, by the way, a Belgian-based team who made their home here in Florida to at least get through the speed weeks here, the Rolex 24, and this race down in DeLand, which is not far at all from the speedway. So a U.S. home base for the Belgian-based team with a pair of German drivers who are taking it to the field today.
Now, I like what Courtney was doing there and staying low to let the leader go by. What I didn't like was I would have liked to have seen like another foot up off that yellow line. Because the transition between the banking and the apron there is significant. And if you drop down below it, what happens is you imagine that massive banking and the flat below it. If you get left side tires on the flat, right side's on the banking, it opens up the under tray to that car to a massive amount of air, and the car's going to get really upset, which is going to make the driver really upset. And then the team's probably going to get really upset because the car is not going to stay straight.
It's a lesson you don't want to learn at speed, correct?
No, you certainly do not. She's doing a great job. She's kept her wits about her through a little pushing and shoving in the early stages. And like I said, and as Gary Clutchian said, who owns that team, you're going to see a lot of her in the future.
The leader, by the way, is entered for the year in the Prototype Challenge Series, so that's
not what Dakota Dickerson wants to see.
No. They'll be a force. Dickerson in the 54, 15 seconds in arrears right now, trying to make up time, but he's already lost a couple of seconds since he took over the wheel.
Well, and that's what one of the team owners told me early on when we were running through the field, and he said, you know, who to watch, who to look for, so on and so forth. And he said, I'll tell you right now, I think the favorite for the championship has got to be the Muehlner team, the 21, because Krantz is as good as a lot of the silver drivers, and obviously Lawrence Hare, 23, is a rocket ship.
Proving it today, still out in front. Their 21 car, 15 seconds ahead. Saw the battle back there for fourth position. This now, the last car on the lead lap for the moment, and not anymore. That was the one driven at first by Naveen Rao, and Matt Bell behind the wheel at this point, but the leader's putting a lap on it. Look at him go.
And that's interesting, because to see Hare get past Matt Bell, and Bell certainly knows that they're down a little bit, but he also would know that if he could have stayed there on that lead lap and gotten a full course caution, he'd be back in the fight. But this is what I was talking about earlier, knowing what you've got, knowing what the capability is on the day. I think what Matt Bell knows right now is they don't have a race car. I mean, he was at a 44.3 last time by, so a second off of Hare's pace, and there may be something that's not quite right with the number one right now, and he may be just saying, you know, we had issues early on, we got set back a little bit, this is where we are, let's take our points and move forward. They weren't magic all last season. They came on strong at the end. That's how they won their championship, and they won it by collecting points when they could, and I think that's what Matt Bell's doing. He's just saying, guys, we're 10th on the racetrack right now, 9th in class. If that's what we've got, that's where we're going to finish.
Kind of makes you wonder what kind of a creative genius Bernhard Muehlner is with a brand new race car, Brian. They've come out here and they've pretty much, with Krantz taking pole, they're pretty much stomping the field at this point.
Yeah, if I'm driving a Ligier a Ligier, and I'm in another team, I might be looking at that going, how am I going to compete with this? I think the two manufacturers are pretty even. We saw differences in the cars last year, and I talked about it earlier. the Duquesne, known as a normal last year, took several laps to get the speed, but then stayed more consistent over a run. Olivier came up to speed almost instantly, but was a handful to drive at the end of a long stint. Dakota Dickerson did everything that he could do, and you just saw him in the 54, to try to stay in that championship. They took all the downforce out of the car at Michelin Raceway Road Atlanta in the final run to see if they could do anything to make up for the straight line speed that the Norma chassis at the time had, and they just couldn't. But this year, in talking to both drivers who are driving the Duquesne chassis and the Ligier, they've said, I think that top speed advantage may be gone. So now what's going to happen is we're going to have to learn these cars as we go as to how they fall off over a stint, what they like and what they don't like. I can tell you one thing, the Ligier looks like it's sprung pretty stiffly, because Dakota Dickerson on the apex curbs there at turn 6, car really looked like it was very, very stiff.
It's the 18 car of Jared Andretti. You recognize the name, and you should. Worldwide Racing renowned family. And he is the son of the late John, who passed away in the last year, with so many greats that we have known and met. And John was certainly a part of motor racing from so many different angles, including winning here at Daytona in the Rolex 24. Jared and John watched this race last year and the Rolex 24. And when they watched the IMSA Prototype Challenge Series, John looked at Jared and said, I think this is where you need to be. This is a series for your next step after being in sprint cars and some lower end stock car action, things like that. They decided IPC would be good for Jared, and so far having a strong run here at Daytona.
Yeah, and you think about what the Andretti family has been through. Aldo passed away, his grandfather passed away December 30th, and it's just been a tough year, but I've been real impressed with how Jared has handled those difficult situations. And you know, he talks about his dad being his best friend. They did so much together, and I didn't know John all that well. I got to know him more over the last several years, and certainly knew him around the racetrack a little bit here and there when I was driving. But just a great guy, and I think what his goal was, that if he wasn't going to be able to beat the cancer that he was fighting, and I don't know that he ever even really gave up on that, but I think his goal was to make sure that he had given Jarrett everything that he could as far as relating his experiences and his thoughts and his ideas and all that to Jarrett. It's like Jarrett would say, he didn't necessarily give me the roadmap, he just taught me how to follow one, you know, and I've kind of come up with one of my own, and I think I'm making the right decisions. That was aggressive by Kazimierz on the 47, and I'll tell you what's impressive, Kazimierz in the -2 category with 40 less horsepower, it gives you an idea of the experience Kazimierz has. He's driven everything. He's driven in the IndyCar series, he's driven in sports cars, and I've watched him back in the day in the Atlantic Championship and SCCA National Racing, and he is a guy that doesn't know anything but flat out. And if you can actually turn the throttle up a little bit past 100%, he try to get that too. Sometimes I think he bends the throttle position, you know, indicator just to try to get a little bit more out of it. But I mean, he's just wicked quick, and you saw it right there. And that's his experience as well, not only in motorsports in general, but in this type of car.
Tonise running very strong there. The leader's just a few seconds behind him. Last car in the lead lap right now for the 60 of Kazimierz, and you see 9 cars still on the lead lap. Kazimierz, of course, in the P3-2. The last of those. By the way, just to put a button on the Jared Andretti story, great book out there by a friend of mine, Jade Gers, written and published this year, called Racer. It's a story of John Andretti, and if you ever want a little bit of an insight into John's life and Jared's upbringing, and also the rest of the Andretti family, picks on cousin Michael a little bit, it's a lot of fun. Look up Racer. It's a great read if you want to pick it up.
Well, and John really was kind of more like Mario and Aldo, and I mean, obviously no disrespect to Michael Andretti, who's been spectacular in his career, but you know, he kind of stuck with what he was really, really good at in the championships, and why would you not? And John was a guy who branched out: IndyCar, sports cars, stock cars, drag racing. You know, I mean, everything.
And he won in every one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, any and everything. Tell you what, David Grant.
Nice little run.
Is having a good run, but Stephen Thomas is not letting him get away. Thomas right there within a few car lengths. See what he can do.
Back
28
up.
minutes to go.
Yep, just under 30 minutes remaining in the hour 45 race here at Daytona. Up onto NASCAR 3 and 4. Down to the start-finish line, and then heavy braking into turn number 1. We had an off recently, Brian. That's the 86 around. Bob Iverson finding that he may have a flat spot or two.
Yeah, and back to the P2 car without the traction control. And, you know, in these conditions right now, it's overcast, not a lot of sun, not a lot of temperature in the racetrack, and you just have to be really, really careful. This racetrack is interesting as well. It's changed over the years as different surfaces have been put down, but a lot of the personality stays the same, and that is there's not a lot of grip, both for power down and for cornering capability in either one of the hairpins, both the International hairpin and the West hairpin.
Stephen Thomas trying to give David Grant everything he can. I'll get up out of the banking here and see what kind of a toe he can deploy. Both a good exit, although Grant got off the corner very well. Might have even pulled a few yards at that point.
So funny, Thomas trying to close in. We were talking about Courtney Crone a little bit earlier, and one of the sponsors on her car is Bob Stallings' dealership, one of his dealerships. And I just looked down at my phone, it kind of lit up. I have a text that says, "Hey Brian, Bob Stallings here." I've known Courtney for 15 years. She's the real deal. Talent, guts, passion. She's a winner, just a matter of time.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic.
Told you she has some support behind her.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a lot of good numbers in your phone too there, Brian. See who pops up next. Go ahead and text Brian. We open it up to you right now. You distract him from the end of this good race here. Albeit back for beyond first place, because right now Lawrence Hare is destroying the field. This again, the battle between Stephen Thomas trying to get around David Grant, sets him up right off of 2 and 2A. Oh, he's got to give way right there.
That was close. This is heating up, and it's interesting. It seems like Thomas has the better car in the braking zones, both Duquesne chassis. So it could just be a matter of tire wear. I'm trying to look back up and see when each made their pit stop. They made it within a lap of each other. So Thomas just seems to be more aggressive and being able to attack a little bit more in the braking zones in the infield. Grant seems to get those good runs off the corner, as you were talking about. If I'm Grant, you can be as aggressive as you want to be in the infield as long as I get the run off the bus stop, because I know where the checkered flag is.
And again, you can see it there, just pulling out ever so slightly is David Grant in the yellow car, JDC car.
Well, and it does go back to engineering and setup, and think about what you want on the car here. You can trim these cars out and look for a little more straight line speed, but with a speed limiter on them, it's just a matter of getting to fast a little faster, right? Or you can put downforce in them and have a better car in the infield. But again, the checkered flag is at the end of a long straightaway. So you want that good rocket ship launch onto the super speedway here, and trying to find that balance, one that's going to be comfortable for the driver on the infield and still give you that little advantage when you leap back onto the tri-oval, is what you really want to look for. That downforce, though, gives you spectacular braking right here into turn 1.
Grant in that yellow 40, by the way, is about 9 seconds or so behind James French in 3rd position. So a bit of a ways to go there. This is one of the closer battles on the racetrack now. And if you missed it, Stephen Thomas, the car behind, stayed in the car. He'll run both stints today. Meanwhile, Tonys Kazimet's on the right in the 60 car, closing in, looking for another spot. Would that be Al? No, that's going to be, that's her position. That's the 81. It is.
It's Al Miller. And This is going to be interesting to watch. So right here, you've got the difference between a very experienced driver in a car with 40 less horsepower, and you saw the run off the corner that Casemets had, and that was sheer driving talent and experience carrying the speed, the rolling speed through the middle of the corner. And right about here, that extra 0.6 of a liter is really helping out Miller, but Casemets,
he said, you know what? If you're going to do that, I'm going to race you hard.
Yeah. And I think maybe since it was right there in front of the tri-oval, there was probably a crew member standing there with a radio going, that car does not matter.
Yeah, or lift.
Yeah, or lift. Remember, it's a different class. That's the other thing.
That's
with
right.
two classes right now, you need to know who you're racing with.
Great point. Tonise Casemets is through. That's for 8th position. Al Miller gives way, and he's about 5 or 6 seconds behind Scott Huffaker in 7th, next in class, that is. So, meanwhile, the leader still out front. That's Lawrence Hare, blue and white 21 for Muehlner Motorsports. Putting on a show today for, I'll say, their local fans. Again, Belgian-based, but has a U.S. headquarters just down the road here from the Speedway.
I just got another text. You want to know who it's from?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, hit me.
No.
Oh, no, okay, all right.
I mean, Colin Powell's a great race fan, but I don't really want to. Nah, I'm just kidding. Stephen McAleer laughing about me calling him 30-something. He was grateful that I didn't give out his real age.
That's well, you know, there's a lot of, shall we say, smoke and mirrors in racing I've found over the years, and age is one of them, and probably body type and weight is another.
I was 29 for 2 years.
Yeah, that's right.
My PR guy made a mistake. Who was I to correct him?
You're just you. You're just driving the car.
It's not my job.
Just little Brian Till.
Yep.
Brian, by the way, a fiend behind the wheel for so many years, has lent his expertise and voice to sports car racing on NBCSN and the IMSA TV network and wherever else there might be an opportunity. Hope you're enjoying our broadcast today. Dave Burns along with him trying to keep pace, as is the entire field with the 21 car currently piloted by Lawrence Hare. I said it again, Lawrence Hare. 21 minutes and a fraction remaining now to get him to the checkered flag and a trophy here at Daytona.
Yeah, he's got that big lead, but it didn't come by his own doing per se. I mean, he's been turning in fast lap times. That's not the issue. The driver that was so impressive and where the lead came from really was his teammate, the driver who started it. That was Moritz Krantz, and Krantz was just spectacular. And as I said, I was told, be prepared for what you're going to see. He is one of the better better bronze drivers that you will ever see, and we certainly saw that. And now handing over to a talent like Lawrence Hare, he just keeps on building on the lead that they had for Dakota Dickerson. It's got to be kind of deja vu all over again. He's like, wait a minute, I'm tired of running second. This is what happened to us last year with Matt Bell and Naveen Rao at the end of the season. He wants to claw his way forward. But I will say this, I was real impressed when you look down the road, and this is a championship, not just a one-race deal. For Dakota Dickerson, Josh Sargent may be a big find for that team. They needed that bronze driver. They found him, Sargent. I had erroneously said FR earlier, which is the equivalent of F3. Sargent was in F4, and Dario Cangialosi was in FR. So two young drivers coming out of that same paddock. But Sargent did an excellent job in the opening stint. And I think in that respect, when they leave here, this MLT team with Dakota Dickerson behind the wheel right now, when they leave here, they're going to look at the result that they had, and they're going to say, you know what, we can build on this. This is something that we can work with, because once again, real easy to leave here with your tail between your legs saying we didn't win, but it's what you do with the lessons that are learned. Life is about failure and how to overcome it. My boys both play baseball, and talk about a game of failure. Baseball is a game of failure. I mean, think about batting averages in the 300s. That means you fail 60% of the time,
yeah.
right? So it's a game of failure. And, you know, if you look at championships that are won in motorsports, most of them are won with an average finishing position of somewhere between 3rd and 6th. So you're not going to win every race. You go out to win every race, but you take the lessons that are learned and then you move forward. And I think that's what Dakota Dickerson and that entire MLT team can do when they leave here. I'm not giving the victory to the 21 just yet because there are 18 minutes left to go. And you and I both know anything can happen in motorsports.
Battle for position here. That black car down to the inside. Al Miller being hounded now by Matt Bell. And that would be for 9th position. They're off of the lead lap, but still battling for a spot there. And Bright, you know, something we've been talking about, if anyone is new to sports car racing, as we talk about Bell hitting the high side now, trying to get by. Bronze and silver in this league, right? Next week at the Rolex 24, you'll have platinum and gold. The rating system for IMSA, it's important for drivers to be rated and developed in IMSA's eyes before they take on the next challenge. So in this series, the bronze and the silver are racing together. Typically, we talked about them, some young amateurs learning their way, some old pros in the amateur ranks, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned bronze, so one of the other things that we should mention is there is the Bronze Cup. We talked about Stephen Thomas winning the Bronze Cup last year. Well, he and the Grants are fighting for it. The Grants, both bronze drivers. Stephen Thomas, a bronze driver. They're fighting for that Bronze Cup. So battles within battles, battles within the same class for different championships, and also that additional class inside Prototype Challenge for 2021.
Bronze driver Al Miller, that black 81, just passed by silver-ranked driver Matt Bell, co-champion of the series last year. Meanwhile, the Grant brothers driving the yellow number 40. David behind the wheel running in 4th place. And
Thomas has dropped out of that picture a little bit, so this will be a good run for David and Keith. A great way to start the season. James French up in front in the 34. That doesn't surprise me at all. We talked about his experience, and that's a good run for Conquest Racing, JMF Motorsport. That Dakeen chassis that they have, that is an updated kit on the 34. So it shows you that the updated cars run just as well, and we saw this in Europe. They run just as well as the brand new ones. And hats off to the manufacturers, and most importantly, the ACO, IMSA, all those who helped balance the performance between the update kits and the new cars to make sure that they were equal. I think the other thing that you got to take into consideration, Dave, is that this is an awesome championship because it's a cost-contained championship. Good battle here.
Real quick, Brian, Tonis Kazimet's trying to stay on the lead lap in the P3-2 car with the leader bearing down on him. Here comes Hare.
He's just not going to let him go. I mean, Tonis is like, you're not racing anybody. He's like, no, I am. There's a car on the racetrack. I'm racing him.
Down on the inside at the Western Horseshoe, and Hare's going to get the spot.
And that's what the downforce does. That gives you that braking. We talked about it. A lot of people think of downforce as something that just helps the car through the corner, but it helps it in the braking zone as well. And that you just saw it. Hare easy, moves it to the inside, and the car's just planted, and off you go.
So 3 of Palmer, he's going to get passed by Jared Andretti going down into the bus stop chicane.
And Andretti has gotten past, is that the 11 that's just behind? The blue car that was just behind him? If so, he's picked up another position. We'll have to see on the long shot.
46 in that shot there. And I'm trying to find on my screen the 11 of Thomas. I don't see it.
Now, Jared hadn't gotten him yet. I look over on the timing screen to what we call the dancing ants, and Jared's not there yet. It was one of the other dark blue liveries that was there just behind him. But I was saying the series is so great because the cars are so good. It is a international formula, so it is a cost cap formula. The car in total with the engine cannot cost more than 290,000 euros, which is about $290,000, $300,000. The update kit's about $60,000 to $61,000. So you look at it and you know that the 5-liter engine is going to go away. Do you buy a new one, or do you update? A lot of whether you bought a new one or whether you updated was a matter of whether they were in the pipeline in an inventory and you could get it done. Speaking of getting it done, 46 around the 3, not for position.
No, that's Eric Palmer in the white-colored 3, the son and the father-son team for the Palmers.
So it was whether or not Duquesne and Ligier had new cars that you could buy. Some teams were kind of better off to update because they didn't want to be up against the time limit of getting their cars so late. But I think they've done a spectacular job. And when you think about those numbers and as far as the cost of a race car goes, and the cars themselves are incredibly serviceable. It's the same A-arm, I believe, certainly in the front, side to side and top to bottom, but I think it's the same A-arm in the suspension front to back, and it's those kind of cost-saving situations that help these cars over the long run and help the cost of running one over the length of a season. Besides that, they're just cool.
Yeah, well, that's, and you and I talked earlier this week, just one of the attractions of this series for those with some means to do so. It's reasonably affordable as far as racing goes, and put yourself in a rocket ship like this, 180 miles an hour on a track like this, with all the history of the Daytona road course going back to 1962, the first Rolex, which wasn't a 24-hour race, but from then on it has been game on for endurance racing in North America from Daytona.
Looking down through the times, and it's hard to tell because you've got to know whether traffic came into play or not. If you catch traffic in the bus stop or through turn 6 as you head up onto the faster sections of the racetrack, it's going to really damage the lap time. I see more raindrops.
Still rain, but on that one part of the track down at the Western Horseshoe.
Well, and the racetrack is big enough that I've seen it happen before where it literally is only wet on one end of it. And that, with closing down on 10 minutes to go, that could bring some drama.
Everyone on Michelin slick tires, including the leader here, Lawrence Hare, the 34 slow. That's James French, and staying slow. Problems now for the 34 car, the Conquest racing car, and he's going to pull it into the grass, Brian. Well,
and that's James French's experience of getting that car well out of harm's way. We talked about cars earlier having problems, and we saw 2 new cars, the latest iteration cars, have problems. This is not. This is an updated car. This Duquesne, this M30 D08 has the 50+ engine in it, so not exactly sure what the issue there is for James French, but here's my concern with where that car is. When you look at it, you go, okay, and there
it was out of the kink. That was your concern, right?
It was out it was out of the kink, and there's rain in that area of the racetrack. And so a car going off at the kink could easily get there. Even in the grass, it could easily happen. And now
he's going to come to the safety crew on the inside.
Yeah, and that's the mark of a very experienced, professional, and heady situational awareness by James French. He knows what's going on. He doesn't want to interfere with anybody's lap. He gets that car not only to a safe place, but near where safety workers are as well. And if he were to have any kind of a fire or any kind of other problem where he needed assistance, it would be there.
Now well off the track by the safety workers that was heading toward the Western Horseshoe. Meanwhile, Lawrence Hare continuing to pace, now 18 seconds plus over second place Dakota Dickerson. And we mentioned it earlier, this team scheduled to run the entire 6-race series in 2021, and will be quite a terror to keep up with the way it looks.
With James French's problems there in the 34, that's going to move Keith and David Grant to a podium spot in the 40, and I don't think Grant really needs to be too concerned about Thomas right now. He's about 5 seconds in a rear, so that's good for them. But when I look through gaps that do seem to be closing a little bit, I think Huffacker is catching Andretti back in that 5th and 6th spot. He's running just a little bit faster. In fact, this last lap, he was a full second quicker than Andretti. And once again, you just don't know when somebody catches traffic and when somebody gets a clean lap, and the delta between those two laps can be significant here at Daytona International Speedway.
This is an interesting development for Bernhard Mühlner and this program. They're well known for GT racing, but have their sights set on Le Mans perhaps next year. And you've got to find your way in a prototype if you've been known for GT racing, right, Brian? It's a different animal, and if you're going to go internationally to do Le Mans, you really, a good year under your belt in IMSA would be well worth your time.
Oh, I agree completely. Any learning that you can do, we talked about that earlier, when it's a class that you don't typically run in, something that you don't know, learning and getting those lessons can apply somewhere else. And like you said, learning this type of prototype, that will take you to the next type of prototype. It's what a lot of these teams and drivers do. Speaking of learning, give a little hats off to Tasha Balog, who the 21 just went past. She was there in the 33, the Junior 3 racing entry. We talked about her and her dad. Ari had problems early on. This is her first race in this type. She's overcome a lot to get here, doesn't have a lot of experience, and she saw the leaders coming. I'm sure her spotter was on the radio, but she did an awesome job, and I don't think she impacted the lap time of Hare in the 21 at all.
Just over 7 minutes remaining now. Will Hare and the Mühlner Motorsports team hold together. They have been rock solid so far from the start. Moritz Kranz, the teammate, taking the car to pole, pulling out a large lead. The pit stops, which again have a minimum time on pit road, so they're all fairly similar. It was smooth, but of course it was not a huge advantage in and out, and they've maintained that gap and even increased it. Problems now for Stephen Thomas. Slow exiting turn 6 and on to the NASCAR 1 and 2.
Now he seems to have been able to pick up the speed a little bit, but the car doesn't look at speed to me.
A little damage there on the left rear.
I don't know if he went around somewhere. The gap now is huge.
Let's take a look. Yes, he did go around, it appears.
Yeah.
But where did the flapping of the left rear begin?
Well, again, there's damage there. It looks like he's gotten into a wall somewhere, but I was going to say, again, as low as these cars run, if you go backwards down off the banking onto that apron, that sharp angle could certainly grab what we call the cheese wedge back there, the cheese wedge, and damage it.
I like that.
Well, it does. I mean, look at that.
It does look like a cheese. I've used cheese grater before to explain tire wear.
Well,
tire degradation.
And there you go.
Here's the wedge itself. And we saw earlier, again, the manufacturer of the harness system or the wiring part of these taillights should be proud. They are hanging on for at least a couple of laps.
Well, and in looking at the 11, I believe he's missing a dive plane on the left front as well. It just as I looked up and saw it, and it went kind of behind one of the graphics. Yeah, that car's been through it today. So that dive plane up on the left front will affect the downforce a little bit. The cheese wedge in the back, they're not just there as something to make it look pretty and stick a brake light or a rain light on or whatever. They too deflect and guide air. You see that there's a gap between them and the bodywork, and all of that, all of those very intricate aerodynamic pieces have an effect when the car gets to speed. They're on there once again for a reason. Every gap, the width of it, how much air it moves through. There have been a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am sitting down with CFD analysis and working through wind tunnels and so on and so forth to come up with the best aerodynamic package. And what I'm seeing right there on the 11 is not what they had in mind.
This is a fun formula. If you missed us talking about it earlier, I'm sure you're very aware. They will be included in the Rolex 24 at Daytona, the 59th running of the race. A 5th class added, and certainly they'll be interesting for sure, Brian, because there will be a speed differential. There may be an experience difference as well. And we've talked to a lot of drivers this week involved in the Rolex about what the traffic might be like. A 50-car field versus under 40 last year, so there'll be more cars on track. But the inclusion of this class in the Rolex 24, it will present an interesting day and night.
Oh, it definitely will. Just a couple more laps for the Mueller team. I think the biggest thing is, like I said, no one really understands where the personality of the LMP3 car is going to fit in that long distance race, the Rolex 24 next weekend. And so you look at the diverse group of drivers that will be in these LMP3 machines. Here in Prototype Challenge, it's bronze and silver only. You pointed it out. Any level of driver can run in that category. So if you think about bronze level drivers in GTD cars with pro level drivers in LMP3 cars, that's going to be interesting. What will be even more interesting is bronze level drivers in LMP3 cars and pro level drivers in GTD cars.
And there's a lot of them this year.
Yeah, so the LMP3 machine, I believe, should be slightly faster than a GTD car, but a GTD has traction control and anti-lock brakes. So you put a really good driver in a GTD car against a less experienced driver in an LMP3 car, which aerodynamically should be better and get the car through the corners faster, but doesn't have the anti-lock brakes. It does have traction control. All of a sudden you can see how the more experienced driver has a better weapon and the less experienced driver has a weapon that's a little harder to wield. So yeah, I think it could be interesting. Starts, restarts, and any rain or any condition like that where grip is at a minimum, I think that's where you'll see the Delta come into play and the different personality that an LMP3 car may have. The same car is going to have at least 3, if not 4 different personalities, because that's how many different drivers are going to be in it.
Well, for those of you listening live this weekend, the Rolex is going to be an affair to watch, especially in that last category, the GTD category. So many pro drivers who were available or who might have been removed with programs closing or changing or whatever. I mean, it is stacked in GTD. And as well, the top class DPI has changed over and added cars. It is going to be something to see the 59th running of the Rolex 24. Today, so far, it has been all about Mueller Motorsports and the German duo who took the car to pole and have led every lap, except maybe under the change of drivers here at Daytona International Speedway. And this time, Brian heading back on to NASCAR 1 and 2. Hare will be coming around to get the white flag.
Well, he is, and his day is going to be over pretty soon. No one near him, but the battle for 4th, 5th, and 6th is getting hot. Stephen Thomas, Jared Andretti, and Huffacker right there, all closing down on one another, and they've got time left to see that order change. Right now, they're trying to get it changed right now. Huffacker in the green and white up above the 11.
Thomas is below him, coming down into turn 1, crossing the start-finish line first. Andretti's gotten by, and so Jared Andretti up to 4th. This is the battle for 5th.
Good stuff. What does Stephen Thomas have? Can he get it done? Can he close that and get that position back? Scott Huffacker pulling away.
There is your white flag for Lawrence Hare. Final lap of the race. Again, it's been an hour 45. At this point, underneath the clock, and only watching the final lap here. There's that 4th place car of Andretti with a fine drive, picking up positions, and Thomas has had to yield. He's back to 6th.
Well, and all these drivers, you know, as I was saying, I was talking about Jared earlier, and he was saying, don't laugh at me if we don't do well. Well, a 4th place finish, I think, is pretty good. He'll still be all grumpy about it, but so many of these teams had to learn their cars when they got here, and they've had so little testing. I think they've done it. All these teams with brand new equipment have done a great job of enduring and just understanding what they've got and taking what they've been given throughout the day. And some of these teams have been given things. We saw the 34 with the problems. We saw other cars involved in an incident earlier on. Those are gifts. You take those, you say thank you very much, and you move forward. And for several of these teams, they'll end up with really good points because of their strong efforts, but because of the problems for others. And that's what motorsport is. And good battles there. Like we said, we saw it between the 18, the 46, and the 11 there on the closing lap. The other thing that's great about Prototype Challenge, many of these races come down to the final lap or two, because once again, the vast majority of the time, the faster drivers are in at the end, and that's when it is definitely game on.
Fastest driver right now, Lawrence Hare. Nobody in his mirrors. Mueller Motorsports and the blue and white 21, they will go to victory lane at Daytona and take home the first checkered flag of the IMSA 2021 season. Here is P3-2. Tonys Kazimets winning that category and finishing 7th overall.
Yeah, good run for him. Dakota Dickerson's going to come across the line and take second. And as we said, it's about points. They may be going and scratching their heads a little bit and saying, what do we have for the 21 for the rest of the season? But they've got plenty of time to worry about that. Right now, they've got a second place at Daytona. And no, I'm not sure that Scott Huffaker is going to let Andretti get away. Andretti around the high side of Trent Hinman, or not the Hinman, that's the 74 of Courtney Crone, but Huffaker's still back there and pushing hard. It's good for Andretti to have that 74 in between, because he's going to catch him right here in the bus stop, and that's going to hinder him a little bit. But man, Scott, once he got past Stephen Thomas, really was clawing his way back up towards Jared Andretti.
A little bit left in the tank, but not enough, and Andretti is going to hold on to that 4th position. A great learning day for Andretti Autosport, fielding this car for Jarrett as he comes to the line to complete his day.
I think Andretti Autosport needs to be happy with that. They got this car late, like a lot of teams did, and they're new to the formula. So they have taken the lessons and come home with a top 5 finish. That's good for points, and they'll move forward with those.
Well, Brian, there's your overall winner there. And as you take a look at the unofficial results up there on the left, who else impressed you today other than the great drive from that Belgian team of Mueller Motorsports?
Well, here are a couple of things that I like, and I think it shows promise for the parity for the rest of the season, and that is, so you've got a Duquesne chassis out in front with the 21, and then you've got a Ligier, and then a Duquesne, and then a Ligier. So right now what you've got is chassis parity up front. And like I said, there were some ups and downs for other teams that helped that, but that's good stuff. The other thing that I think is really cool is for Tonys Kazimets, he showed that you could take one of those LMP3-2 cars, and when we get to tighter circuits, those guys in that class may be mixing it up or right up there for top 10 finishes.
They'll be there all season. Last season they can race those. This is the season to begin the 2021 season. The IMSA Prototype Challenge, the usual spins and problems early on, took some contenders out of the race. But overall, a safe day with lots of action on the World Center of Racing, Daytona International Speedway. In the end, the 21 car was consistent all day, whether it was the pole sitter or his teammate in front, and Mueller Motorsports are the winners of the Scouts of America 145 from Daytona. For Brian Till, I'm Dave Burns. See you next time.